Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Divinity School and the Center for the Study of World Religions, I'd like to welcome you for coming this evening for this very important event. My name is Frank Clooney. I'm the director of the center and very happy to be standing up here at the moment. We have a wonderful event tonight, a very distinguished speaker who'll be properly introduced after a bit, but Kiran Martin, a very distinguished doctor and active worker for charity in India, will be speaking to us on the topic of beyond distinction, beyond difference, transforming lives in Delhi's slum communities, and you'll be hearing more about her and from her in a moment. I would just like to express our gratitude publicly for the Greeley money that has made this event possible. This is the annual Greeley Lecture for Peace and Social Justice. It has been made possible by the Dana McLean Greeley Lecture for Peace and Social Justice Endowment Fund, which itself is a gift of the Dana McLean Greeley Foundation for Peace and Justice. The gift was made not too far in the past in honor of the Reverend Dana McLean Greeley, a graduate, who believed that all people of all backgrounds and faiths are deeply connected to one another and should work together for positive social change. As you'll see tonight, we have a wonderful example, an instance of this commitment to justice and making it real. The lecture itself was endowed with the purpose of speaking on issues of peace, social justice, or interreligious dialogue that reach a broad audience in the Harvard community and beyond. Again, I think all of this, the interfaith and the justice, come together tonight. But I will say no more except to introduce our introducer, Professor David Hempton, well known to most of you, I believe, is the Alonzo L. McDonnell Family Professor of Evangelical Theological Studies. He is a social historian of religion with particular expertise in populist traditions of evangelicalism in Europe and North America. His most recent book that has arrived in print is Evangelical Disenchantment from 2008, but he has just finished another book, a book on the global history of Christianity in the early modern period. It is titled The Church in the Long 18th Century. I think it begins and ends longer. Part of the IB Tourist series on the history of Christianity. It is, as David modestly indicated to me, basically a history of early modern global Christianity. So who better, David is also a longtime friend of Kiran Martin, who better as scholar and friend could do this introduction than David. So welcome.
Thanks, Frank. It's a very great pleasure for me to introduce my good friend, Kiran Martin, to Harvard, and to welcome her daughter, Prerna, who's also here. Prerna graduated from the college in 2009, so welcome both of you. Dr. Martin graduated in medicine and surgery from the Maulana Azad Medical College in the University of Delhi, before specializing in pediatrics at Lady Hardinge Medical College, also in Delhi. In 1988, she encountered a cholera epidemic in a South Delhi slum, an experience that literally changed her life. Shocked and disturbed by slum conditions in her own city, she founded and now directs the organization called Asha, the Hindi word for hope. Now, more than 20 years later, Dr. Martin is an influential figure in the field of slum development, and Asha's extensive programs are benefiting almost 500,000 people in around 50 slum colonies in Delhi. Through dedicated professionalism and through the empowerment of women and children, Asha has pioneered successful programs in healthcare, slum housing, educational development, and financial management. In 2002, Dr. Martin's achievements were recognized by the Indian government when she was awarded the Padma Shri, one of India's highest civilian awards, by the President of India. She works closely with and enjoys the support of senior figures in the Indian government, including the Home Minister, the Honorable P. Chidambaram, who happens to be a graduate of the Harvard Business School. Dr. Martin's work is supported by governments and organizations around the world. She has spoken about it before the United States House of Representatives, the British House of Commons, and many of the world's leading universities. Last year, she gave the prestigious Human Rights Lecture at the University of Melbourne, an event that has led to a durable partnership between Melbourne and Delhi in the field of higher education. In return, numerous overseas visitors have visited Asha to see firsthand the improvements in the health and financial status of slum communities. These visitors have included the Prime Minister of Australia, the Governor-General of New Zealand, and the First Lady of Japan. Dr. Martin has a particularly close relationship with Harvard. Her daughter graduated here in 2009, as I said. And year after year, Harvard students have interned in Delhi with remarkable results, both for them and for Asha. Last year, I had the privilege of visiting Asha in Delhi to celebrate the first great cohort of slum children to win places in the University of Delhi. I kept a diary of the visit, and here's a brief entry for August the 6th, 2009. Woke up to the Hindustan Times full-page coverage of Asha's educational project. The headlines are terrific. Empowering the poor, graduate dreams from the Delhi slums. Helping Hand NGO helps over 100 underprivileged students secure admission in Delhi University this year. More than 40% of them are women. Covering the page are 5 pictures and 5 verbal portraits of great teenagers with exciting aspirations. Dressed like any other college kids, they stare back at the camera with purposeful expressions and an unmistakable quiet confidence. Later in the morning, we visit the Tigri slum community and speak first with the community health volunteers, mostly illiterate women, who are strong, purposeful, and dignified. They have in their eyes the look of people who have endured tough times, but who have a strong sense of their own worth. By respecting the lives of others, they have learned how to respect themselves. They tell stories of slum transformation, of standing up against corruption, of taking responsibility for the health of their neighbors, of sensing the quiet power of democratic pressure, and of acting as a proud team of human restoration. They help each other along with their stories, eager to make sure that their sisters get a chance to tell the stories of their lives as well. No one who has met them can ever forget the look of steely determination, softened by compassion, that looks you back straight in the eye, proud but not prideful. I ask them of their dreams for the future, and they talk of good houses, happy and successful children, and dignified lives. Next, we get the chance to speak with around 20 of the college-bound kids who grab the morning headlines. They are even more remarkable in the flesh than they are in newsprint. Their eyes shine, their teeth flash, they try out their English, they listen patiently to their classmates, and they express unsolicited gratitude to Asha for helping them live their dream. Aspiring accountants, teachers, professors, air hostesses, designers, graphic artists, engineers, linguists, advocates, public servants, police officers, and plain old art students with no clear idea of what they will do. They speak of their growth in self-confidence without a hint of self-congratulation. They too listen to their classmates, help each other out, and astonishingly, they want to mentor those coming behind them. They are not just looking out for themselves. As they rise, they want to bring others with them. Next up are the younger children with even brighter eyes and wider smiles. Like children everywhere, they giggle and poke one another and delightedly show off their painted hands and arms. But when they settle into their stories, something remarkable happens. For we Westerners who often cosset and indulge our children's whims, the sight of children who actually take responsibility for the health and welfare of their communities, including the elderly and the vulnerable, is quite remarkable. One girl talks artlessly and captivatingly about helping to save the life of her friend by securing an early diagnosis and treatment of life-threatening TB. The two girls look at one another with a kind of affinity that only life and death can bring. What is most striking about the young children is how they have discovered their own sense of worth by helping others. So, that was my experience of the Delhi slum. Please welcome then our distinguished guest, one of the most remarkable women I've met, Dr. Kiran Martin, founder and director of Asha India.
Thank you for those kind words of introduction. Dean Graham, members of the Greeley Foundation, Professor Clooney, faculty and students of the Center for the Study of World Religions, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to have the opportunity to address you all this evening. I'm delighted to be back in Cambridge, which has given me so many cherished memories of time spent here over the years. I proudly watched my daughter graduate from Harvard College in 2009. and it is wonderful to be here again at Harvard, with whom I have enjoyed a happy association since 2005. I would like to begin my lecture today by transporting you back to what I saw when I first entered a slum area in New Delhi in August of 1988. Although I had lived in the city for many years, I had never before plucked up the courage to walk into one of Delhi's ubiquitous slum communities. Here is what I found. Shanty huts made of cardboard, plastic sheets, and pieces of cloth, barely 50 square feet in size, lay tightly packed together. Piles of rotting garbage were everywhere. Pigs wallowed in ponds filled with dirty water and solid waste. Little children played around the filth and the excrement that lay all over. Some were rummaging among garbage, looking for bits of metal and plastic to sell. The public toilets at one end of the slum were piled high with rotten feces. The urinals were broken, and the stench of urine and excreta filled the air. There were small, shallow hand pumps everywhere that the residents had dug themselves. The water was brown and contaminated with feces, and everyone used it for drinking, bathing, and washing. Electricity was being tapped illegally from overhead cables, and hundreds of live wires that had been hooked onto these cables found their way into people's homes. A closer look at the shanty hut revealed that there was barely enough room for a small cot. There were no windows or doors. Pots and pans were hanging under the roof to collect the leaking rainwater. A little kerosene stove and a few utensils lay in a corner. Huge rats kept running across the floor, and there were flies and mosquitoes everywhere. The women looked pale and tired of life. There seemed to be large numbers of men lying around, doing nothing. Some lay on the ground, drunk, reeking of alcohol. 5,000 people lived sandwiched between a large dirty drain on one side and a government office complex on the other. Added to the initial horror of what I saw when I first walked into Ambedkar's slum was the realization that the slum was in the grip of a cholera epidemic that was raging through the city's shanty colonies. You can imagine my feelings of complete helplessness. I hardly knew what to do, but I felt compelled to do something. With a borrowed table and chair, I sat in an open space and began to treat hundreds of sick children. Slum dwellers make up 30% of New Delhi's population of 14 million. The UN estimates that the number of people in the world living in slums passed 1 billion in 2007. Sub-Saharan Africa has the highest annual slum growth rate at 4.5%, followed by Southern Asia at 2.9%. The residents are disadvantaged in nearly every conceivable way, suffering from numerous health, environmental, social, and political problems. In Delhi slums, the maternal mortality ratio at 750 and under 5 mortality rate at 149 are among the highest in the world. As the relentless rise in food prices in urban areas combines with persistently low incomes, the urban poor cannot afford to purchase adequate amounts and types of food. Even if there is enough food for the whole population, only the rich can access it, while the poorest struggle every day to ensure 2 meals. Serious malnutrition and stunted development is widespread in slums. Children from poor families are often born into hunger, grow up in hunger, and might die in hunger. Community conflicts occur regularly as different languages, traditions, religions, and castes offer little sense of cohesion. Women are mostly restricted to the roles of domestic servants or child bearers and struggle to voice their opinions. The sex ratio is about 850 girls to 1,000 boys, and female feticide and infanticide are common. To give you an example, this Mayapuri slum that you see in this picture is located along a railway line with trains passing by every few minutes, sometimes just a couple of feet away from the slum huts. In October 2006, an Asha health volunteer found a newborn baby girl on the tracks minutes after the train had gone by. She had been pushed down the toilet hole of the fast-moving train. The majority of people living in slum areas work in the urban informal sector. This sector is characterized by job insecurity, low wages, and dangerous work. The markets for land, basic services, and labor are skewed in favor of private interests. These unequal opportunities create minorities in the marketplace, whose individual members are automatically excluded from a wide range of outcomes associated with economic growth and globalization. Slum areas remain a blind spot when it comes to policy interventions, job creation, and youth support. The supposed urban advantage of better access to education remains a myth. For most slum families, educating their children is the last thing on their minds. As families struggle to survive, many children are forced to work to supplement the family income. Every child up to the age of 14 is entitled to free schooling, but the government schools they attend are poorly resourced and have low teaching standards. English and computing skills are barely taught, and the option of higher education remains an expensive dream. Shocking human rights violations in the form of forced evictions and sudden demolitions are common, although they are in complete violation of Delhi's slum housing policy. Slum inhabitants do not have a legal document, such as a title deed, to prove tenure rights. There are no democratically elected institutions in slums. Residents are exploited by unscrupulous politicians and self-appointed slum lords who take advantage of their large numbers and lack of education. At the time of elections, false promises are made to improve their living conditions in return for votes. Their lives are therefore characterized by lack of power and feelings of dependency. They are so used to being at the bottom of the pile that the idea of entitlement as a person and as a citizen holds no meaning for them. So many castes and different religions mean that there is an atmosphere of disharmony, alienation, and resentment that breed intense competition where resources are so scarce. Neighbors are at conflict with each other, and there is no sense of community. From my early beginnings in 1988, I went on to establish the organization Asha. That is, as David said, the Hindi word for hope. Over 22 years on, Asha works among 400,000 slum inhabitants, focusing on a holistic approach that addresses the health, environmental, gender, educational, and financial rights of the urban poor. I recognized right at the start that empowering slum communities to become partners in slum development would be the key to sustainable poverty reduction. Participation is critical to enable people to achieve their full capabilities, demand better services, and foster equality. It forms the heart of a rights-based approach to human progress. My initial efforts at establishing partnerships, however, proved to be very difficult. The poor had a dependency mindset that was well entrenched through the empty promises made by political leaders. There was a general feeling of distrust towards outsiders and towards each other, and a fatalistic approach to life. I began the painstaking process of helping slum residents get organized. The breakthrough came when they started to achieve modest successes through their collective action. They then became excited about the possibility of change. Over the years, hundreds of slum volunteers became lead agents of transformation in their communities. As we worked together and lobbied government, water points were installed, streets were paved, toilets were constructed, electricity was installed, and healthy collaborative partnerships were built with all stakeholders, such as police officials, political representatives, federal and state government officials, and so on. Asha health centers were established in all the slum neighborhoods. Hundreds of community health volunteers were trained by Asha and began to provide primary health care to the communities. These women were equipped with basic medical skills and given responsibility for looking after particular segments of the slum communities. Respected by their communities for the first time in their lives, and having been empowered themselves, they helped empower others to address the health needs of their neighbors. In the 90s, Asha engaged in path-breaking work with the city's government to provide land titles to slum women. This came to be known as Ekta Vihar, the capital's first on-site slum housing program. Women were given land titles and bank loans and became proud owners of their own homes. Owning assets greatly enhances a woman's ability to influence decision-making at the household as well as community level. Planned neighborhoods were built with proper infrastructure. A remarkable transformation in living conditions began to happen. The program, however, was fraught with challenges and setbacks. There was major opposition to providing women with ownership titles in a feudal and patriarchal society. Huge kickbacks were involved in land transactions. Well-off neighbors did not want slum dwellers living next to them permanently. Slum lords who had grabbed large areas of land within the slum refused to vacate. Exploitative political forces opposed the program and issued threats and warnings. Change does not come easy in these environments. This pilot initiative paved the way for the slum housing policy at both the state and the national level. The government subsequently granted land tenure to thousands of slum residents all over the city. Despite the success of this initiative, land security has been consistently challenging. What you see here is an unexpected forced eviction that took place in Delhi in 2006 as part of the urban renewal process in preparation for the Commonwealth International Games. The government had planned illegally to demolish the homes of over 1 million slum residents without rehabilitating them. International prestige clearly counted for more than the lives of the city's poorest residents. What happened was that at midnight on 24th April 2006, the local police announced to the residents of this area that they would have to vacate the slum by 6 a.m. the next day. Over 15,000 men, women, and children who had been living there for the past 25 years were in a state of shock, as were we. 5 bulldozers arrived the next day, approaching the slum from all sides. The wheels of the giant machines crushed the bricks, the plastic, the utensils, the cots, mattresses, pillows, chairs, tables, everything. The residents lay down on the ground in front of the bulldozers. Hundreds climbed all over them, but to no avail. At that point, a bizarre incident interrupted the demolition. The government official in charge of the operation was killed instantly by a live electric pole that had come loose and fell on him. The police temporarily halted all operations and went away. Meanwhile, through hectic lobbying with several members of parliament, we were able to gain the attention of Mrs. Sonia Gandhi, president of the party that held power nationally, the Congress party. She then instructed the city's authorities to rehabilitate the residents with Asha's help. Every family was given land titles at another location on the outskirts of Delhi called Savda. Savda is now a well-established neighborhood where thousands of residents who would have become homeless because of the Commonwealth International Games now have a home of their own. In January of 2008, the then Finance Minister of India, Mr. P. Chidambaram, now India's Home Minister and a Harvard graduate, as David said, accepted my invitation to visit an Asha area. He was deeply moved by the diversity and extent of the transformation that he witnessed. However, when he found out that barely anyone had bank accounts, he realized that his government's policy of financial inclusion found no expression among urban poor communities that made up a third of the population of every town and city in the country. He invited me to a meeting with the branch managers of the national banks in the area and facilitated a relationship between Asha, the 9 largest public sector banks of India, and with his ministry, and requested us to design a loan scheme for the urban poor. The next few months were exciting as bankers, finance ministry officials, and Asha team members worked together to make this happen. The Honorable Finance Minister himself formally launched the project in June of 2008. Thousands of zero balance accounts were opened, and banks were competing with each other to open the most accounts. The network of Asha staff and volunteers made it possible to identify promising projects and reliable clients. Since the launch, millions of rupees have been given by the banks as low-interest loans for businesses, home renovation, transportation, and so on. The loan repayment rate is an astonishing 98%, and many families have significantly enhanced their incomes. When banks opened their doors to the urban poor of our nation for the first time, I began to realize that higher education for slum children was no longer an impossible dream. It could become a reality, as banks were willing to come forward with higher education loans. Higher education is viewed by most families as a process that delays their children's ability to contribute to the family income. They have no money to spare for college tuition and other expenses. Children struggle with a lack of space, the noise of the slum environment, and unreliable power supplies. They have no role models, and nobody takes the time to talk to them about their career options. Inevitably, they end up doing the same unskilled and poorly paid jobs as their parents. Asha's higher education program is a pioneering effort. For the first time in its history, in July 2009, India witnessed the acceptance of 106 slum children to one of the nation's most renowned centers of higher learning, Delhi University. India's Home Minister, the same man, he was the finance minister but moved on to home. He was the chief guest at Asha's university acceptance ceremony. It was a proud day for the slum children and their families, and for our nation. Students from Asha slums all over the city were admitted to bachelor's degree courses in the sciences, math, commerce, economics, languages, and humanities. We were privileged to have with us Professor David Hempton from Harvard Divinity School as our guest of honor on the occasion. Today, 400 children from the city's poorest neighborhoods are going to university and leading the way for thousands to follow. The Cabinet Minister for Education, the person you see here, Mr. Kapil Sibal, warmly congratulated them on their achievements and pledged his full support for the program. In addition, 2 of our students, amazingly, found places in top engineering colleges with annual acceptance rates of just 0.1% and 0.5%. They will be the first 2 engineers from India's slums. The University of Melbourne has graciously offered to provide scholarships for some of these students to do their masters at their university once they graduate. Successfully entering higher education has been a long and difficult journey. Asha focuses on providing individual support and counseling to students during their final years of high school, persuading parents of the value of this opportunity, and guiding students through the entire college admission process. We then award them financial aid towards college tuition and other expenses, and facilitate access to bank loans where needed. Guidance and support to the students continues throughout their college years. The opportunities for enhanced learning have been seized upon with great enthusiasm. Children who would have once been working in roadside stalls, shining shoes, or picking rags, now have the confidence to attend university with much more privileged youngsters. The process of their integration into the rest of society has begun. After spending years longing for equality, they are finally experiencing it. So what does an established Asha slum look like today? Asha health professionals provide quality care to every one of its residents. Community health volunteers administer simple but highly effective means of primary health care. The child mortality rate has fallen from a 149 to 28, and the average for India as a whole is 69. Maternal deaths are extremely rare. Almost all children under 5 have received all their vaccinations, and vaccine-preventable diseases are hardly ever seen. Most couples have only 2 or 3 children, far fewer than before. And the majority of people are healthy. An entire generation has become more aware of health issues. There is improved access to safe water, improved sanitation facilities, drainage systems and paved streets, and safe and healthy shelter through land tenure reform and capital investment in infrastructure. Almost every child goes to school, and increasing numbers are attending university. Each person has their own financial identity and access to the entire range of banking services. The resulting economic activity has brought about higher living standards. Women have been empowered to take control of their own lives. They actively pursue the best interests of their families and their communities, and participate equally in economic and political affairs. They enjoy more respect and cooperation from men, who also play an exceedingly important role in community development, with positive and supportive relationships being established between the 2 sexes. Children's associations provide an outlet for the creative energy of youth and the honing of leadership skills, while building awareness of both the rights and responsibilities of citizenship. Through democratic elections and delegated responsibility for slum improvement, the children learn empathy for others and practical ways to contribute effectively to their communities. Slum lords have gone out of business, and strong, effective relationships with political leaders and relevant officials are the new norm. As the poor are empowered to lead full and meaningful lives, vibrant communities are being built through the advance of love, neighborliness, and reconciliation. In these communities, the poor become possessors of a dignity that is inalienable and inviolable. Their worth and value is not based on any human quality, legal mandate, religious or social affiliation, individual merit, or accomplishment. It is an essential part of every person, an intrinsic quality that can never be separated from other essential aspects of the human person. In these communities, the response to injustice is consistent and firm, but through non-violence and non-confrontation and active peacemaking. The residents know full well that injustice is strong, forceful, and committed. It therefore thrives on moral ambiguity and failure to commit. The oppressors also know that their preeminence depends on most people doing nothing. Oppression thrives on communal disunity and a sense of powerlessness. In these communities, it is about pursuing forgiveness and reconciliation, about defending and affirming those treated with scorn and exclusion, about practicing a liberating generosity towards all, regardless of religious tradition, caste status, gender, and age. Through working together and taking responsibility for their own communities, slum dwellers have become a force for liberation and transformation. I am fortunate to have a remarkable team, the members of which are marked out by their compassion, resolution, and courage. Expression of a lived solidarity with the oppressed, a non-sectarian character, transparent actions, and fearless advocacy for the marginal are at the core of our approach, as is a serious commitment to long-term, non-violent engagement with apathetic and often corrupt bureaucrats and other powerful political forces with vested interests. I would now like us to turn our attention towards the concept of inclusive growth and inclusive cities. The outcome of inclusive growth should be that no person in society is deprived of minimum basic capabilities. Pro-poor growth is one that enables the poor actively to participate in and significantly benefit from economic activity. Promoting pro-poor growth requires strategies that are deliberately biased in favor of the poor. Such an outcome would rapidly reduce the incidence of poverty, so that those at the bottom end of the distribution curve of consumption would have the resources to meet their basic needs. Issues of empowerment, engagement, and the voice of the poor and excluded are all critical for the achievement of pro-poor growth outcomes. Pro-poor growth and human rights are both central and complementary approaches for poverty reduction efforts. The Asha model is an example of how cities can be places of inclusion and participation rather than places of exclusion and marginalization. In all developing regions, improving the lives of the urban poor calls for programs that include housing infrastructure and finance, improved water and sanitation, and adequate living spaces. These programs must be associated with healthcare, education, microcredit, and employment. A healthy, well-educated population is a major asset for any city, and knowledge is a prerequisite for enhanced civic participation in the social, political, and cultural spheres. The education of girls and young women yields enormous intergenerational gains. It is positively correlated with enhanced economic productivity, more robust labor markets, and improved societal health and well-being. A city, or indeed the wider world, cannot claim to be harmonious if large numbers of people cannot meet their basic needs, while others live in excessive comfort, even opulence. If the social, political, economic, and cultural dimensions of the inclusive city are to be turned from a mere conceptual paradigm into reality, they must be implemented within a rights-based framework. The urban poor must participate equally in decision-making and enjoy effective fundamental rights and liberties with full exercise of their citizenship. Governments must therefore back commitments with bold, direct pro-poor policy reforms and view growth as a means and not an end to development. The title of this evening's lecture is Beyond Distinction, Beyond Difference, Transforming Lives in Delhi's Slum Communities. What I have presented is not so much an argument about how social transformation can take place, but a description of how it has taken place in some of the most unpromising locations in our world. I believe deeply in 5 principles that have made this change possible. 1, disenfranchised communities need to be made aware of the power of collective action in improving their own conditions. 2, empowerment must come to all, women, children, and men, to enable the true potential of every individual to be unleashed for the benefit of communities and our world. 3, social divisions, whether created by religious conflict, gender inequality, or economic oppression, need to be minimized before durable change can flourish. 4, in a globalizing world knit together by technology and access to information, it is vital for the children of the world's poor to have access to knowledge, education, and hope. Generational cycles of despair can be broken. 5, religious traditions need to become part of the solution, not part of the problem. Religious values grounded in the golden rule of love for God and neighbors, compassion for the poor, and social justice for all can energize change. That is my own story. Before I close, I would like to turn these questions back to my audience. How will you work for peace and social justice in your own lives and communities? Beyond the practical improvements to circumstances that come about through the application of these values, they also inform our identity and that of our communities. By the very fact that we carry out peace and justice, we are ourselves shaped and defined by these principles. The values that bind us together, that define us as part of a community, are as important as those that characterize our individuality. I urge you to consider your engagement with the poor in your own city, state, nation, and wider world. Let it be one of joint action. Do not call them to the table only after the harvest. Invite them to be equal partners while you are sowing the seeds. Your yield will be twice as plentiful. I am so happy to have been given the honor of delivering the Reverend Dana McLean Greeley Lecture. Reverend Greeley believed that people of all backgrounds and faiths are deeply connected to one another and should work together for positive social change. In India, we proudly remember our struggle for peace and civil rights. The founder of India's independence movement, Mahatma Gandhi's own nonviolent methods, helped inspire the American civil rights movement and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, of whom Reverend Greeley was a friend and supporter. Dana Greeley's legacy in the promotion of peace is deeply inspiring. Finally, I would like to thank the Greeley Foundation for this opportunity. I salute their ongoing support of programs of peace. I am grateful to Harvard Divinity School and the Center for the Study of World Religions for inviting me here this evening. Specifically, I would like to extend my thanks to Professor Francis Clooney and Professor David Hempton. I warmly remember the great interest they have taken in Asha's work, and I am grateful to them for their friendship over the years that we have known each other. Thank you.
For inspiring and wonderful lecture. And the nice thing about this is, having been there on several occasions, that it's always good not to be disappointed by what you see. The reverse, and it's just a wonderful inspiration being there. So we have some time for questions if you feel up to taking more. I know you've been working all day, and a lecture at BU at lunchtime and Harvard in the afternoon, but if you would be willing to take a few questions, that would be great. So the floor is open to We have about 10 or 15 minutes or so, and then we have a reception next door, so more questions to ask, the more you get to eat and drink.
First of all, just thank you. Incredibly inspiring and heartwarming. I wanted to ask you, when you first entered the slum and saw the conditions and decided to take some action, you talked about how difficult it was, how you were met with suspicion, and how it took a long time to really forge the kind of trust that was able to create the conditions now that we just witnessed. Can you talk about those early days and a little bit of what strategy you used or what kept you going, and maybe some challenges you faced and ways you overcame them?
Yeah, sure. When I started working in Ambedkar Slum, when I walked in, first of all, I was greeted with a mountain of garbage and I didn't even know how to go in. So then I had to look for a fence that I jumped and somehow came inside. And when I started talking to people, of course, I was this idealistic pediatrician who thought I had all these skills, and people would warm up to me and welcome me with open arms and say, yes, yes, come and help us, and so on. And but what I found is that everybody I met directed me to the slum lord. And I had never met a slum lord ever before in my life. So when I actually met him, he was a very formidable character, and he sized me up and down. He asked me, interviewed me actually, and so that was my first encounter, and I began to understand then the dynamics of slum is quite complicated, and there are many different things happening over here that I need to really understand before I can even begin to work. And what I found is that just after my clinic hours, like when I would see patients, there was an epidemic going on, like I described. But then later in the evenings, I would talk to the women, they would come to me. I think also because I wasn't sitting in a large building, that helped, because I was just sitting there, I was one among them. And they came along and they would talk to me about how it was such an awful experience to even try to go to the toilet, because they would have to go after dark or early in the morning and so on. Mm-hmm. And so as they would narrate their stories to me, they saw in me someone who was willing to listen. And then by of course, I had a small team of people who were very empathetic to the problems that somebody else described. And that's how I think the building of a relationship, and a building of a relationship of trust. And I think being a pediatrician helped, because I was able to immediately administer to some of their urgent needs at the time.
I was wondering how, in addition to gaining the trust of the slum dwellers, you were able to form a relationship with the government that partnered with you on a lot of these.
Yeah, it's really hard, because they're not used to dealing with slum dwellers. Like if a slum dweller, or even if a group of slum dwellers tries to go to a government office, they have to even going past the security guard at the gate is a challenge, let alone going and meeting the officials. And I remember that the very first time I encountered government officials, they had actually come to inaugurate a toilet block which was at one end of the slum. And their plan was to inaugurate it and just go away from the outside. They had no plan to come inside at all. Then when we heard that they were coming, we thought this is our first encounter with the government. We've never encountered the government before. So we thought we would try and create an environment to help them to come inside. That also we faced a lot of opposition, but at the end of it, they did come in, and they were wading through the muck, and they were, finding it so hard to even walk, because there was no road there. There was nothing but slush and dirty ponds of stagnant water and pigs everywhere. Somehow they made their way in. By then there was a little clinic. It was the start of a relationship again. I think the key word is relationships, and then they began to understand that it was important for them to initiate change. But the key I felt was that in the long term was to help slum dwellers to have access to these government officials, to have access to their local politicians. And in the early years, we began to insist that they should accompany us, they should be treated with respect in these offices, their voices should be heard. So these are some of the things that we did to gain their attention.
Could you talk a little bit about the process of forgiveness and reconciliation that took place within these communities?
Yeah, because the thing is that, like I said, there's intense conflict when you go into a slum area. And that conflict is because of scarcity of resources. There's also the caste system, which means that people from different castes may not necessarily want to talk to each other or even collect water from a common point. There's religious conflict as well. And so you enter an environment where there's a lot of disharmony. So what I did is start working according according to their felt needs, things that were their common needs, and which were very urgent and very pressing. And so they realized as we continue to work that unless they were going to work collectively, that they weren't going to achieve anything. So as they began to slowly, by and by, work collectively and they started seeing success, suddenly they realized that there was so much self-worth within them, that they were not, their intrinsic value was not nothing. It was just as much as somebody else's. And as these processes began, there was more harmony, there was more neighborliness. People began to eat and drink with each other. People began to do things together. And then by and by, realized that so many of these things are frivolous. And I mean, an attitude where you're willing to see somebody, you reject their deeds but don't reject them. That sort of attitude, they themselves realized was helping them to overcome so many barriers, so many obstacles. I think they thought that even practically these concepts are very important.
Can you tell us something about the land titles that you managed to get for them? In any city, land is such a prized property, and Delhi especially, you have all of these things about regularization of slum colonies. It's a political thing. How did you manage to get that done?
Yeah, it was really difficult, like you rightly said, because land in Delhi, especially in South Delhi, where I've done some of these projects, are possibly at the same rate as land in somewhere, maybe New York or Boston or something like that. And as you rightly pointed out, a lot of times commercialization of land takes place, land use gets changed. While government officials are somehow trying to make money and indulging in corrupt practices. So this project was done with some government officials who were very influenced by the work of Asha. And they felt that working along with Asha, the best results could come out through this collaboration. So we had to do a lot of hard work to convince them to do this on-site slum improvement program in the same place, because before that they'd been always relocating them in different parts of on the outskirts, really far away. So, and that one project was, I think, saw the light of day because of some sincere bureaucrats and other government officials with whom we established good relationships. It was such a huge success that in a short while, they started living more like middle-class citizens rather than slum dwellers. And so the government decided that it was going to become part of the policy of the city.
Another question at the back.
Yeah, do you come from any particular faith background, and if so, how has that influenced your work?
Yes, I mean, I am a disciple of Christ, and the Christian values that I have understood from the reading of the Bible are very important to me and have motivated my faith and have helped me to help me to experience what I do. But I've also been able to see that human values that transcend across all of these different religious traditions can be very powerful motivating forces for people in the slums who come from so many other dispensations and so many other traditions.
How do doctors in Asha try to help families where alcoholism is a big problem?
Yeah, there are multiple ways in which we tackle the problem. First of all, its sale was discontinued because everywhere there was alcohol being sold. In the shanty huts, there was alcohol being sold around in the neighborhood, and a lot of it was local brew that was very dangerous as well. So the women's groups were very active in curbing the sale of alcohol. That was the first thing they did. And then, of course, as the empowerment processes gathered momentum, as people started getting land titles, they began to realize the value and the importance of having smaller families and being able to do financial planning. And the thing is, alcoholism in slums is also related to lack of hope. It's because, every day you just come back home and you know that you have to live in that same shanty hut and there's no hope for the future. And you just live from day to day, and that's why there is so much alcoholism there, to a very large extent. And so I find, but then I do have to say that there are still people who do drink, and you can refer them to AAs and all of these different things that are present in the city, but the problem hasn't gone away.
Can you tell us about the religious demographic in a slum, and if you think that those religious needs are being met more and more as the slums develop?
The religious demographic in an Indian slum, I would say for example in Delhi, by and large you will find 80% are Hindus and 18% or 19% are Muslims and 1% are Christians. And sometimes you may not find even that 1%. In certain slums you might have a reversal, where there's a Muslim dominated population, you might have 80% Muslims and 20% Hindus. And those are the primary religions that you will see in the slums.
Can you, thank you so much for your presentation. Can you tell us what kind of relationship the students who've left the slums have with the slums after they've left?
No, they haven't left yet because the very first batch was admitted in 2008. So 2011, in May of 2011, that's next month actually, the first lot will graduate. And since they want to continue studying, because a graduate degree in India does not have that much meaning. There are so many graduates, and so now they are all going to do, all of them have decided to either do a bachelor's in education or a master's in something, MBA and so on and so forth. Now when that happens, when they finish and they get well-paying jobs, then they will want to move out.
Yes, thank you so much for the talk. I'm curious about, you had mentioned women being empowered through becoming medical practitioners or through land rights, and it also mentioned that when you first went into the slums, men were often lying around drunk, and that over the course of working with Asha, the gender dynamics and the relationships between men and women have transformed. So I'm wondering if you can say a little bit more about that, and then maybe also how men are being empowered.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, the whole approach has always been one of establishing supportive relationships between the two sexes rather than a confrontational approach. You know, that's the easiest one, where you're so disappointed with the male member and you know, you have so many complaints against him that there's a natural feeling of resentment. And what we thought was that it was very important to have supportive relationships, otherwise the empowerment process was not going to really go anywhere with the women, because they would constantly be up at arms, and that was not the whole idea. The idea was to build community, and active peacemaking was the whole idea. And so with that kind of approach, by and by the men began to understand the usefulness and value and worth of having a wife who's able to share responsibility, who's able to help him raise the family, that he's not on his own, feels so much more supported. And it took time, but then by and by those lessons were learned by the men.
So in a city like Delhi, where you juxtapose the Ambika slum with some of the richest people in the world, especially when you take into account black money, would you say that the middle class and the upper class are sympathetic to the plight of slum dwellers, and if so, is that changing one way or the other?
Well, the honest answer is that no, they're not. I mean, a lot of learning has to take place in those communities to help them to understand the dynamics of urban poverty, what it's all about. Theirs is a very simplistic view. You know, they see them living there as neighbors. They don't understand really what the causes are and what is at play and what are the different interventions that are required for people to be able to come out of their poverty. And so they're usually resentful of them and as neighbors. And there's a very clear compartmentalization in the city. In fact, even the middle class and the wealthy don't really interact with one another socially.
I would like to know how you personally have dealt with skepticism that has come maybe from the middle and the upper class, maybe family or friends that were skeptical at times, or peers in the medical field.
Yeah, I mean, because this is a rather unusual path to tread on, isn't it? So when I started my work, my batchmates, I still remember. You know, it's so wonderful that I went to Delhi University and these students are now in Delhi University. Can you imagine what a great thing, what transformation? But just coming back to what you said, that I had a batch of 180 students in my medical school, and you know, my friends knew that this is what I was hoping to do, and it was really going against the tide and going against the flow, both in terms of my friends as well as family members and other people, you know, socially, my own parents, my mother, you know. So these are decisions that I suppose are off the beaten track.
Yeah, you indicated that 1/3 of the city dwellers live in slums in India. Is that correct?
Yes.
So, could you tell us how has your project inspired other projects maybe in the country?
Yeah, there's lots of things you come to know about and lots of things that you don't come to know about. Because, you know, as you grow and as your work gets known, all sorts of things keep happening, both in India as well as in other countries. But as for Delhi and as far as India is concerned, I would say that so many policies have been formulated on the basis of the Asha model, primarily having worked with government or for them having studied it. You know, so whether it's financial inclusion, whether it's land titles, whether it's higher education, and primary health care through training community health volunteers and working in partnership with communities. These are all things that have been picked up by so many NGOs and governments, both in India and abroad. And so I would say that you know, it's just a great opportunity to be able to share what one has learned over these years. And I have learned a lot from them too. There are so many of them who do such excellent work, and you know, I make it a point to try and go to different ones and try and see what ideas I can pick up from them.
You hear stories sometimes just sort of about Indian bureaucracy and resistance to helping, and it sounds to me as if there's this other side too, that there's actually a compassionate side of government officials who really do want to help. Do you find, does it make a difference if you can get them to come and see with their own eyes what's going on, or how have you motivated the government to really take some significant action?
Yeah, no, I think that's really a very good question, and it's true that by and large you always tend to be hold the view that you know they're apathetic and they're uncaring and they're corrupt and all of that. I've always had this philosophy that every human being, you can reach out to the goodness in a person if you make an effort through relationship building. And of course there are some with whom it comes a little more easily, and some it can take a very, very long while. But I think that they get really excited because a lot of them are looking to do something useful. They did become public servants thinking that they would like to serve the nation. And then they get embroiled in corruption and they get embroiled in the bureaucratic red tape, and they feel frustrated.
Sounds familiar. A couple of Anne?
It's so inspiring to hear how you've been able to instill such a strong set of consistent values throughout every level of this operation. And I'm very interested in how that happens once it gets beyond what you can touch with your hands. And you talked about building relationships, but you can't have relationships with everybody who's involved in this operation. So what is the organizational structure that you have used that is able to extend these values beyond your own reach?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. I mean, we are 150 of us as staff, but we have 3,500 volunteers. Now for every slum lane, there is 1 or 2 volunteers. It's been broken down all the way down to 1 lane, which might be consisting of about 25 to 30 households. And we've created a system in place whereby these values have actually found expression across the board, you know, staff and volunteers. They have written value statements that they understand, and it's a marvelous example of how a slum woman who may otherwise be illiterate but does understand what the most important values are, and has made a choice to actually live a life by those values. Now, a lot of these volunteers are from the slums. I mean, they could be spending that time earning a living, they could be spending their time getting monetary compensation from somewhere, but they have made a conscious choice to dedicate themselves to slum development. And so there are many, many fora all the time at which these values are constantly talked about and outworked in the lives of the entire wider Asha family, as I call it.
It's time for one more question, maybe. Try and put the email there. Right. Kiran, thanks again. Frank, you want to
Just 2 things. One is to add, of course, I mean, all of us are incredible thanks to Kiran for such an inspiring presentation and for doing this wonderful work that, for the benefit of all of us. And so we're very impressed, and thank you for David for mediating and making this possible by the contact UN also. I would just like to say that you've also given us work to do, that you raise questions for us, and I think we are in a privileged location, those of us who are here. We have incredible resources, we have credible opportunities, and we have to think of ways, probably not so brilliantly as you, but nonetheless to use what we have. And we have, for instance, the Greeley Fellowships for summer work, and we have 3 students this summer taking advantage of the resources, one to do some work in Jerusalem, interfaith work, one in the UK, and one at the Henry Martin Institute in Hyderabad in India. And that's a small, important and small possibilities based on the resources we have. But we had other things going on. We had a wonderful lunch discussion about justice at the border a few weeks ago, MTS MDiv students on the Mexican-Texas border, students who had gone at the spring break. But it seemed to be there are many other things we could be doing, and I just invite any of you in this room who are here tonight to think of things that HDS can do, but particularly that the center here might help with. One of our themes of the center is scholarship in a world of suffering, and how do we be responsible scholars in this world. So I think it's a wonderful occasion to celebrate what you've done, Kiran, but also to put all of us on the spot. And, but on a lighter note, we will proceed fairly quickly. We were going to have a lovely reception out here, but we do have one lovely reception set up in the conference room in front. We kind of like move that direction. Don't bog Kiran down here, but we can move down there and then relax and talk to one another some more. So thank you all for coming.